Hi everybody, let's get started with Math Lesson 7.5. The topic of today's lesson is multiplying mixed numbers by whole numbers. Our objective says that students should be able to multiply mixed numbers by whole numbers. You should be able to do that by the end of today's lesson. If you don't already have paper and pencil close by, get that now because you're going to need it for mental math and our math message. For mental math, the first thing you need to do is name the first 6 multiples of each number. Remember, a multiple is like counting by a specific number, or taking that number and multiplying it times 1, times 2, times 3, times 4, and so on. I'll do the first one to help you remember. For this one, you're supposed to name the first 6 multiples of 2. So 2 times 1 is 2, 2 times 2 is 4. 2 times 3 is 6. 2 times 4 is 8. 2 times 5 is 10. And 2 times 6 is 12. The first 6 multiples of 2 are like counting by 2's. You're going to try the next one. So on your paper, write the first 6 multiples of 5. You can pause your video if you need extra time, and then turn it back on once you have the first 6 multiples of 5. For the first 6 multiples of 5, you should have written 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, and 30. Let's try one that's a little bit harder. This time you need to name the first 6 multiples of 3. I want you to pause the video now and write the first 6 multiples of 3. Then turn it back on once you have your numbers written. For the first 6 multiples of 3, you should have written 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18. Now let's try a hard one. This time, on your paper, you need to write the first 6 multiples of 7, or counting by 7, or taking 7 and multiplying it times every number, up to 6. So pause your video now and figure out the first 6 multiples of 7. Then turn your video back on to check your answers. For the first 6 multiples of 7, you should have written 7, 14, 21, 28, 35, and 42. If you had those right all by yourself, pat yourself on the back because that was a little bit challenging. Now let's move on to the math message for this lesson. The story says, last week, Tammy practiced the trumpet for 2/3 of an hour each day. What was the total number of hours that she practiced? You're going to solve this one on your own, but I'm going to give you some pointers to get you started. So we know that Tammy practiced her trumpet for 2/3 of an hour each day, so less than an hour each day. You need to find out what was the total number of hours that she practiced last week. You need to remember that there are 7 days in a week, and each day she practiced 2/3 of an hour. I want you to pause your video now and solve this problem. Remember, if your answer comes up as an improper fraction, you need to change it to a mixed number. And don't forget to include your unit because we want to know how many hours that she practiced throughout the week. So pause your video now, solve this math message problem, then restart the video when you're ready to check your work. For the math message, I suggested using a multiplication strategy to solve this problem, where you take 7 times 2/3, where you could put 7 over 1, multiply the numerators, then multiply the denominators, and get 14/3 as your answer. Then ask yourself how many 3's are in 14, and that's 4. 3 times 4 is 12, so the difference between 12 and the numerator 14 is 2, and then the denominator stays 3, for a total of 4 2/3 hours. But you could have also used repeated addition, where you added 2/3 7 times. You would get the same answer, 14/3, that you would then need to change to a mixed number. You might have also done what we call some relational thinking, where you think to yourself, you know that 3 2/3 added up together would be a total of 2. So if 3 2/3 is 2, 6 2/3 would be a total of 4. And then another 2/3, because remember we need 7 2/3. You would just add on that 2/3 to the 4 and get a total of 4 2/3, which you'll see is that answer we got up there. Another way you could have done it would be to draw a circle. You would need to draw a whole circle, divide it into thirds, fill in 2/3, but do that 7 times. You could have gotten the correct answer any of those ways. I feel like multiplying was probably the fastest way to do it. Now, if we are thinking about how much time she spent practicing, we said she spent a total of 4 2/3 hours. But in today's lesson, they're going to ask you a lot to convert or change hours into minutes and even into seconds. So if she spent 4 2/3 hours practicing, how many minutes is that? I want you to pause your video now and see if you could solve that problem. How many minutes are there in 4 2/3 hours, or in 4 hours and then 2/3 of an hour? Pause your video and see if you can figure that out. Then turn it back on when you're ready to check. All right, let me show you how I would have solved this problem. I would have broken it down and I would have said, okay, how many minutes are there in just the hours, the 4 hours part? So I would have said, I know 4 hours times 60, because there are 60 minutes in every hour. And I can multiply 4 times 60 pretty easy, because I know 4 times 6 is 24, and then add on the 0 for a total of 240 minutes. Then I have to figure out how many minutes are there in 2/3 of an hour. So I could do 60 times 2/3, put it over 1. 60 times 2 is 120. 1 times 3 is 3, which is an improper fraction, but I could figure out how many times 3 goes into 120. I know 3, let me change my color, goes into 12 4 times, and then add on the 0. So then I could take my 240 from my first multiplication step, then add on my extra 40 minutes from my second multiplication step, and I get a total of 280 minutes. So if I asked how many minutes there are in 4 2/3 hours, I would say that is 280 minutes. Now we need to figure out how many seconds is that. What I want you to do now is think about, how do you go from minutes to seconds, or how many seconds are there in a minute? Well, I know that we have 280 minutes we're talking about, and we need to multiply that times 60 because there are 60 seconds in every minute. I want you to pause your video now and solve that problem. All right, let's check and see how you solved this problem or what answer you got. I would focus on multiplying 28 times 6, then I could just add on my 2 zeros. But I can't really do 28 times 6 in my head, so I would rewrite it over to the side. 28 times 6, and then I can multiply this pretty easy. I know 6 times 20, because that 2 represents 20, is 120, because 6 times 2 is 12, and add on the 0. Then I multiply my 6 times my 8, and that's 48. And then I can add those two together for a total of 168. But don't forget, we have to add on the 2 zeros. So if I was trying to figure out what is 280 times 60, I'd say my answer is 168. Add on my 2 zeros, then put in my comma. 280 minutes is the same as 16,800 seconds. If you had that one right, pat yourself on the back. That was pretty hard. All right, we will now move on to the main part of our lesson. So I'm going to stop the video now, and then the next video will do the teaching part, the objective part of this lesson.